What is happening, Blades? And welcome back to the Blades Ramble. This one I am very excited about. We've got our first official guest on today. I've finally been able to sort out the logistics and hopefully everything's working okay. Maybe a work in progress, but you won't see that. If there's anything goes wrong, I'll cut it out so we get to the straight into it. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to straight away welcome in Darren Smith. Darren, welcome.
Hi, Jimmy. I didn't actually realise I was your first guest, so I'm very humble and honoured about that.
Absolutely. There couldn't be anybody else, Darren. I talk about you that much on this channel. I feel like you're almost a co-host at this stage. You're certainly a massive contributor, whether that's willing or not. I certainly pull on a lot of information that you provide. So, yeah, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited, as I say. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, start getting guests on, but you are the man that I refer to on a regular basis, as I've said. So we're going to get into all the rumours, all the gossip, what's happening with the takeover and everything else. But first, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about you and how long you've been a Blade and how it all started for you in the red and white.
Well, like most fans, I think I was born a Blade, whether I liked it or not. So my early experiences were going to the games with my dad. I think probably the earliest games that I could actually remember around the time where we built the South Stand. So probably I got involved just as we started to get rubbish and start dropping through the leagues. So I think if you could stick with United through that period, you can stick with them through any period. So I suppose going to most of the games and everything was probably around the 80s, early 90s. So lifelong fan, really, and then by profession, I'm an accountant, and that got me involved in certain bits and bobs behind the scenes in football. So it's all come together for me, really.
Fantastic. Any sort of early memories of favourite games around that period as you were growing up?
I know it sounds a bit daft, really, but my favourite season was always the 81-82 season when we won the 4th division. So yeah. I think I only missed 4 games that season or something like that. So just being on the road for the first time, watching a team that was winning, and that we were sort of like the Manchester United of the 4th division and taking over grounds, home ends, away ends, the lot. I absolutely loved that. And then obviously I never thought I would see United in the top leagues, to be honest. We sort of dropped out for so long that when Harry Bassett took us from the 3rd division to the 1st division in 2 seasons, and obviously that was a similarly exciting time, and I'll never forget Leicester away. And so there's been quite a few, and then obviously Chris Wilder's first period when he got us back out of League One and the Championship. I think it's always been, we've had such bad times that when we suddenly get into the good times, they're the ones you appreciate the most.
That's right. That's where the old "it's never boring being a Blade" comes in, isn't it? And it's funny that you mentioned that season because I wasn't around then, but I'm fully aware of it because it's one that my dad often harkens back to and says absolutely brilliant times. And he talks about Leicester. That's his favourite game. And yeah, obviously for me, it's more the triple assault season, the 2 semi-finals and the playoff final and things like, and obviously the Wilder run. But yeah, there's always seeming to be peaks and troughs with United. But would you want to be a Crystal Palace or somebody like that? That's just, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're probably striving for that right now in some ways, but I think there's a little bit of excitement that comes along with being a Blade that's not there for every club. So no, that's great. Thank you for that. How did your relationship with the Prince come to be then?
Well, I mean, basically, all it really was if you actually go back to the early days of when the Prince first got involved, he was a very quiet character, really. You didn't really see him. Kevin was the face of the club. He was a Sheffield United fan. He was at the ground. But the Prince was actually quite active on Twitter in those early days. And I don't know if you recall that Jim Phipps was actually on Twitter and trying to use Twitter as a tool to communicate with fans, like clubs were not used to, basically. But the problem was, obviously, the conflict between the 2 owners sort of kicked in. And it was a strange one because at the time, in hindsight, people look back differently. But at the time, I think when the conflict started, it was very much most United fans were on the side of Kevin. Obviously, he was a United fan. He was very present. He knew a lot of people. And the Prince, there was that sort of latent racism of a chap from Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't come to the games. Who is he? So without any knowledge, and probably most of the United fans were on the side of Kevin. But through some other contacts, I knew that some of the things behind the scenes made it not quite as black and white as that, and that maybe what the Prince was trying to do was be quite fair and even-handed, whereas a lot of what Kevin was doing was quite controversial. There was, and then in the court case, a lot of these things came out about the situation with Stephen Bettis and the like. So I was just on Twitter trying to be even-handed, if I'm honest. And it turns out that the Prince saw this, and he'd seen that by him being on Twitter and Jim being on Twitter, that there was always this problem that if they put an opinion forward or did something, the abuse came, and it's just the nature of football. I think he wanted to use Twitter. He'd seen how even-handed I was, and we sort of started trying a few things, putting things out on Twitter, just to really show fans that we were trying very hard. So it was around this season where he'd won the court case, and we were just coming into the Premier League, and people were frustrated. We weren't signing anyone and things like that, a bit like now. And he just wanted to say, look, we are trying our best here. And we saw my Twitter account as being the vehicle for that. And then over time, it's obviously 4 or 5 years now, we virtually speak every other day, every week. And he tells me stuff that's happening, and he trusts me to be the filter, really. We don't really sit down and discuss what we want to say. We just want to show people that there's two sides to every story, really. And the gain of doing it unofficially, so I've been asked this before, the gain from doing it unofficially is that if, for argument's sake, United sell a player and the fan base don't agree with it, I can be on there telling people why that decision was made. But if people don't agree with it, there's no point in them abusing me, because it's not my decision. If the Prince was on there, or an equivalent of Jim or Stephen Bettis or wherever, they just say, you're wrong, this, that, and the other, why did you do it? Whereas for me, I can cut a conversation short and just say, well, it was, I might agree with you, but I'm just telling you, this is the thought process.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think you have become the unofficial spokesperson for the board, essentially, to a degree. And I appreciate you have to filter that, but you are the one that can either pour cold water on some ridiculous rumours, or confirm that, well, this might be happening, but we can't talk too much about it at the moment. And and I've spoken to you about this, and I say it regularly on the channel, that I think you have done more to help Prince Abdullah than you'll probably realise, in terms of you are that intermediary, aren't you, at the moment, between sort of communicating to the fans. And it's interesting to know that that's sort of not an intentional approach, but certainly that the Prince is happy for you to share certain information, just by way of getting that out to the fans. And it's a shame in some ways that Twitter's just only a corner of the fan base, and hopefully there'll be more people on YouTube that see this and things like that and become familiar with yourself, because you can only do so much from a Twitter handle. But obviously I've obviously spoken to you previously, and the news that you provide is vital to sort of not just to keep you in the know, it's more to settle fans' nerves and things like that, and what's happening with this. And to be honest, looking at some of the exchanges you have, I don't know how you have the patience, to be honest. A lot of the time, it's admirable that you come back to so many people. And, you know, as I say, I don't know if I'd have had the patience to do it, but it's great. So, yeah, really good stuff, that. So what I've done, Darren, in preparation for meeting with you, is I've spoken to our Ramblers. They're our members on the channel. And I've asked them to put if they had any questions that they'd like me to ask you. So I've got a few questions here. So if you're ready, I will dive into those. And the first one comes from Ozblade, who says, are the transfer targets all players we've had our eye on for a while, or are they more opportunistic moves? Or probably a blend of both, I assume.
Yeah, I think the fan base have probably, again, it's this area of transfer windows, and there's very much a bit of a black and white. I've seen it reported quite a lot that we have a £20 million transfer budget, and for transfer fees and no mention of salaries and things like that. The transfer window is never as straightforward as it seems. It's not like you have all the faces of players on a desk and you pick them all out, sort of X Factor style. It's really, we're watching players all the time. We're analysing players all the time. There are players that back in January we might have thought would be ready for us now, but maybe had poor second halves of the season. There are other players where might be very interested, but we know a much bigger club are after them. So it's a very difficult sifting process, and where you see a lot of players linked with Sheffield United, you've got to bear in mind that when we're looking at collecting the data, we're probably only looking to sign 5 or 6 players, but we're probably asking about 50 to 60 players, because we not only have the players that we really want, but we're sort of testing the market to see if a player we really wants this wage and this signing on fee, could we get what's sort of the market rate? So we may even ask about players that we have no intention of signing. So often on Twitter you get, are we interested in this player? Have we made this player an offer? And I could honestly say yes, in the sense of yes, we've spoken to their agents, but I also know they're not really high up on our list of players that we want to actually follow through and sign. So it's a lot of it is, and there will be an element as well of we'll look to sign players that are probably outside our budget currently. But if suddenly there's a player sold, you don't want to be just sort of scratching around trying to sign somebody that you know nothing about. So there are certain players that are out there that people might say, oh, I didn't think that was within budget, and it might well not be unless other things happen.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting that we sort of spread our net as far wide as possible and sort of just then cherry pick from what all the information we've gathered, and it's a sensible approach really. Because the follow up question to that you've actually touched on, Darren, because is the £20 million rumoured transfer pot just a red herring really, a negotiation ploy to let other clubs think that we're actually potless or with very low funds at the moment?
Well, yeah. Well, let's not beat about bush. We will probably have the second lowest budget in the Premier League. We've gone from probably the second highest in the Championship to the second lowest in the Premier League. That's just how the food chain works, really, in football. To be honest with you. So yes, our budget is restricted. But what I would say is there are decent players available that other clubs would probably just be merging into their squad that would have first team opportunities for us. So it doesn't make us unattractive. It doesn't make all players outside our budget. The 20. What I say to people on the 20 million is, it makes no difference to the club if they sign somebody for £5 million and pay them 35,000 a week, to paying a loan fee for 2 million and paying somebody 85 grand a week. The spend in that first 12 months will be exactly the same. And I suppose the best way to explain it is to actually explain one of the targets we have. At the moment, we're looking at a defender. If we went to him and tried to sign him today, I think we could manage his salary within our budget. He's from a secondary league, but he's a regular, he's a full international, but he's a regular choice. So we could come to him and probably fit him within our salary budget. And I know from the budget we have, we could actually pay the fee that the club are looking at. And we're talking around the sort of €10 million mark.
Right.
But the problem we have, and this is one of the problems we have with a lot of our transfers, is we want to put a relegation clause in. So suddenly this player needs to consider newly promoted team. He may get a pay cut in a year's time of 40%. So the deal that we're trying to do is we would sign him on a loan. We would pay the club a loan fee, which would then be deducted from an option or maybe even an obligation if we stay up fee at the end of the 12 months. This guy, we can not really worry about his salary, because we are not going to put ourselves in an unaffordable position if we get relegated. So suppose we sign this guy, and so in the newspapers it says chap loan, no talking about loan fees or anything. We could have probably bought a Championship player for 10, 15 million pounds, who would have fitted into the budget and been prepared to accept the relegation clause because they're already on a championship wage now. So the headline would say transfer fee 10, 15 million pounds. Whereas we're doing a deal here where we're paying somebody probably higher wages and committing to 10 million pounds if we stay up in 12 months' time. In the end, for us, I think we're getting a better deal, but the headline would say we've spent less in the summer. So this is the issue we've got. And last time we were promoted, I don't know if people remember, but we were buying sort of Luke Freeman, Ben Osborne, Ollie McBurney from the championship. So we paid big fees for them, but they fitted into our wage budget. There is an argument you could do that again. But the argument may be that the more you pay in salary, the better quality of player you get. We could probably pay someone who's a loan player double what we could afford to pay those players, but the loan fee would be nothing like the transfer fee. So it's just how you approach it and what type of player you want in your squad.
Darren, this is exactly why I'm really appreciative of you coming on, because it's just clarity for us. That makes so much sense, and I think it's such a sensible sort of business approach, if you like. You're never going to please everybody. Some fans will think we should be spending more on transfer fees. Others will think we're spending more on wages. I remember when Chris Wilder was in charge, and I'm a huge Chris Wilder fan, as you're aware. You could argue that he didn't spend the money very wisely. But that's not my point. My point was going to be, when he was spending all that huge outlay on transfer fees, people were saying, well, it's no good because we're not offering wages that would match that sort of player. We have the Ollie Watkins and the Matty Cash and players like that. And that'd have been great to get them to Bramall Lane. But, I mean, it seems unrealistic now because of what they've gone on to do. But at the time, it seemed achievable. But it'd have been a huge commitment from us. And then, like you say, are they going to agree to a 40% wage reduction and things of that nature? So, yeah, I don't think you're going to please everybody all of the time, but I really appreciate your clarity on that, because it's such a sensible approach from the club. And we've seen how close we came to real financial trouble without going into too much detail. But obviously, you've spoken on that on the Sheffield United way. So for anybody who hasn't seen the financial breakdown that Darren's done of last year's account or the year before last's accounts, go and watch that episode, because it's really informative and I found it really enjoyable. So thank you for that, Darren. The next one comes from David Vinter. Any academy players, in your opinion, you feel are ready to make the step up in the near future?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we're stepping up a league, and even our established players might not be able to do that step. So if you're going from the academy, and I hear a lot of voices within football that say that the jump from academy to real football is massive. And maybe there needs to be a rethink about how academy football is organised. But I think we probably are looking at some real good generational talents. And I know that people like Arblaster, Asula, Harry Boys, who's probably not got mentioned much, they are very, very highly rated. But would you want them to go from effectively League One loans or academy football to Premier League? What I would say is that one or two of them have the opportunity now, because obviously without the signings in place yet, they're actually playing with the first team and in pre-season. And you can get certain players that really put their name forward and compete. And I don't think Heck is really particularly scared of trying these players. He's shown that he's blooded quite a few, and obviously someone like Brooks did well in the FA Cup.
Yeah, he did.
But I don't think we can actually hold on to these players and not affect our squad number, our squad size, because they're academy players and they're under 21. Yeah. So we could hold on to them, but I think it might be better for the likes of say Harry Boys to follow the Reece Norrington Davis route. Well, last time we were in the Premier League, he got 2 really solid loans in the Championship, and then he was ready in the Championship when we were relegated. I think Will Asula he only had that half a season at Derby. He probably needs a full season somewhere to score goals. I think the one that really pushed forward last season that probably was under the radar was Harrison Neal, who had a really good loan in League Two with Barrow. And I suppose the logic now is that he needs to be looking at League One or Championship. But again, a lot of this depends on the contacts we have in the leagues and whether we can place them with good loan clubs, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree in terms of it's one of the very few sort of negatives for the youth players to be a club that's just got promoted, and we're obviously going to have to up the quality in the first team and the overall squad. So it does close the door on a couple of them, or certainly makes it much more difficult for them to break through at this point. Had we not been promoted, and obviously the financial situation as it is, it's likely a lot more of them would have gotten a chance in the first team. But I think something that I were quite keen to sort of know really is the plan now that we're going to be padding out the squad with additions and get up to hopefully around that 25-man squad. Previously, we've had to send our youth players to like the National League, which isn't an ideal level for them, but it was due to that recall option, and we didn't have many. We didn't have the depth of squad that we're hoping to have going into the Premier League. So is there much more chance now of them getting EFL loans and staying there for either half or the full season? Is that in the works, do we think, or are you aware of?
I think, like I say, I think the plan is to have a sort of a 25, 26, 27-man squad, really, basically, this season. So you would, and that would be without any of the youngsters, but or maybe a third goalkeeper, but that apart. So you would say that they could we could commit to them having 6 months loans rather than having the recall option from National League. The only thing I would say is there's a lot of places on the bench in the Premier League. So there is an argument that if you were really in two minds, you could put certain players on the bench and think that they may get time here and there. I think it'll just get decided by how well they do in pre-season, if I'm totally honest with you.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for them, particularly with, like you say, the signings yet to come in, which we know are in the works. But they're under the spotlight with Hecky and the management team now, aren't they? So it's their time to impress. Next up, David Vinter's second question, and it links into something that Mr. Vancouver asks as well. What are the contract situations of the rest of the lads who are expiring at the end of the coming season? Are talks underway with Egan and the like to get those deals sorted, or is it something that we'll focus on more after the window shuts?
Yeah, it's a funny one. This, I think I was being asked this question about this time last year because we had a lot of players in theory that were coming to the end of their contracts. I think what you have to be careful about, and what we saw this season, is we had a long list of 8 or 9 players that in theory were out of contract, but obviously we held options on them, and some of those were in our favour where we chose to trigger them or not, but some of them are in the players' favour, whereby if they reach a certain level of appearances, they're triggered automatically. So for all last season, people were saying Wes is out of contract, Ollie McBurn is out of contract, Ollie Norwood's out. They weren't. They were all boxed off. And I think we've got a very similar situation this year. The club actually specifically told me not to talk about options because we like to keep those in house. But
absolutely, yeah, it's fine.
I think we're covered on most of the players that people are worried about. But obviously, there's the 3 big exceptions. Really, are obviously the ones we know about, and we would have loved to have tied down, which are Sander Berger, Illy, and Daniel Jefferson. So they're the 3 I think which we are in talks with as soon as possible. And I think the rest will get this window out of the way and start talking to in the autumn with a view to getting them tied up on longer contracts. But bear in mind, there's this takeover in the background. So
yeah,
if you're a rep of one of these players, there is an argument that Sheffield United come to the table with the best offer that they could possibly make today. But if you're the rep of a player, you might say, well, let's see whether these new people that come along have got bucket loads of money and they might be able to offer you this more or that more. So there is an element of, even if we offered good money today, there'll be something in the back of the minds of players to say, well, let's just see how all this pans out.
Yeah, no, that's true. And to be fair, I were going to come on to this shortly, but as we've touched on it now, just to go over those players then. So Daniel Jefferson will start with out of contract, or allegedly out of contract at the end of the season. We may have an option, we may not. I know it's you're unable to confirm full details, but just in terms of securing his future, he's the one I'm most confident on that we can retain. I also think he's the most expendable, and that's not because I don't want him at the club. It's because obviously he's not the one that's solidified himself in the first team at the moment. The sticking point for me, I think, will be if he holds the cards, if he's only got these 12 months left, and undoubtedly he'll want to play in the Premier League, and that's completely understandable. But is his development better served on loan in the Championship for a season? Would he agree to that? If I think what he wants may stunt his development in a certain way, because if we bring in another striker, for example, Illiman stays, McBurney's also in front of him, he's not going to get as many minutes as he'd want in the Premier League, I don't think. Obviously, Hecky can always surprise us, and he got a fair few minutes last season towards the back end. But what are your thoughts on Jefferson, and how confident are we that we can tie him down?
Jefferson's in a situation where he's sought after by a lot of big clubs. But I think he's realistic enough to realise that someone like a Chelsea could easily sign him today and never play him, but loan him into the Championship. Yeah. And he could probably earn more money and have better training facilities during the period he's back at Chelsea. And there's other clubs, Man City and people like that. I think what Sheffield United offer him is exactly what you've said. He has to see a pathway to the first team and be playing Premier League football, which is more realistic with us than it is with any of the top 10 in the Premier League. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why decisions like the one we made on Billy was made. I think it is with a view to showing the younger players, both Sasula and Jefferson, that there's a pathway to playing in the first team for Sheffield United. And I think that was a big part of that decision, if I'm honest. So we would love to get Jebo on a long-term contract, both to get him on the pitch as one of ours, but also to secure him long-term and protect our market value with it. It's one of the things that the Prince always talks to me about, is that he really regrets the fact that we sold them Calvert-Lewin when we did at that stage.
Yeah.
And he's determined not to do that again. So I think we've got a good argument with Jebo to tell him that he'll be there or thereabouts in the first team. But I think it sort of answers your question. I think he's staying with us rather than going out on loan to the Championship. I think if we told him that, he may as well leave and go somewhere else, and we may as well cash in.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, and I think there's so much potential in the lad. It's just how do you sort of, and it's Hecky's problem to address. How do you sort of blend him in when we're hoping to up the quality levels even further? And yeah, it's going to be difficult, but there'll always be opportunities for him. And I think this, although we like to be a possession-based team, I think that in the majority of games next season we'll probably be without the ball more than we are with, and he lends himself nicely to a breakaway sort of counter-attacking style, I think, the way he plays. So yeah, fingers crossed that we can get Jefferson done. The one that sort of doesn't fly under the radar, we're all very aware of it, obviously, but because Illiman is out of contract and he's the absolute superstar that I think we all recognise, he's our main man and the most elite player we've got at the club. I'm on record as saying he's best player I've ever seen in a United shirt. But another huge star player, Sander Berge, is also in the same boat. He's out of contract in 12 months and he doesn't get talked about as much because of the cloud over Illiman. What do you think our chances are of keeping Sander? Just cards on the table, Darren. I think both players will walk out for nothing at the end of next season. I don't think we owe them anything in terms of, I think both have hugely contributed towards getting us back to the Premier League. It's just clearly a huge risk. And I understand why we're taking it, because we're a better side with both of them in the team. But it's a huge risk to gamble it all on survival, on keeping these two superstars, really. Chances on keeping Sander at the club beyond the end of next season? Or will he leave as well? Do you think a bid will come in that's too tempting not to accept, and he may well leave before the end of the season?
I think there is a chance of that, if I'm absolutely honest with you. I think the problem the club has at the moment is, if you ignore the fact that they're 12 months from the end of their contracts, you've effectively got about £50 million of talent there in Illy and Sander, and quite frankly, to replace them like with like, that's what you'd be going out and spending in the market, and we just don't have that money. So to face the prospect of basically taking a huge gamble, which is they're the two that will keep you up, and if you don't go up, they'll both leave for virtually nothing. I know we would get a compensatory fee for Illy, but nothing for Sander. It's a big gamble, and we took that gamble in January. We took that gamble last summer. I can't remember if we did the summer before. I think Sander might have been injured, but we've been. That's the decision we've had on our desk really every summer, and I think the fans will say, well, we can stomach that decision more now because obviously the income in the Premier League is going to be greater, but there is still this element of protecting the long term, and you're as you can imagine, if either of these players leave or any of the players we're talking about, we do have replacements lined up that we would like to bring in. And it's, for argument's sake, the situation with Sander is, I know the player that we would probably look to bring in if Sander did leave. He's got Premier League experience. He's a young player. He's got potential. He fits the profile that we're talking about. He's probably played, I don't know, around 1,000 minutes in the Premier League or something like that. If you were to sign him today, you'd have Sander in the first team and this lad on the bench. So Heckie's argument that he doesn't want to sell Sander because he can't get someone better or of equal standing is absolutely right. The board have to think of it a different way. They've got Sander for 1 year, and at the moment he's showing no real willingness to sign a new contract, so he leaves for nothing in 12 months. Or you could sign someone for probably the equivalent fee that's younger, that signs for 4 years, that you've got, if you're back in the Championship, that you've got resale value and everything else. So there's a financial versus a football decision, and I think in the end it will come back down to, it'll be whoever comes in for Sander and what sort of fee they'd be prepared to pay. For Sander, I think he's happy. He's facing a 12 months in the Premier League. He's with a bunch of lads that he loves. He'd be more than happy to see his contract out. But if a big club from Europe comes in or something like that and they're in the Champions League, he might sort of forgo maybe some of his signing on fee that he stands to get in 12 months and sort of shares that with us. And maybe we get 10 million and he gets 10 million instead of him getting 20 million in 12 months' time. So these are all pieces in the jigsaw, really. It depends on who comes and what they offer and what the player's prepared to accept, to be fair.
Yeah. No, thank you. And it's more or less where I think most of us felt that Sander was at, that this will be his last season with us. And it's more a case of whether we'll see him till the end of the season, really. And that's a board decision as much as it is Sander's decision as well, I suppose. So the main man then, Illiman and Dye, I was confident that he would be in a similar boat in terms of seeing out his contract. I don't think he'll re-sign with us because I think if I'm his representative, I'm saying don't. And that's me being honest and not wearing my Blades hat. But the wrinkle in what I thought may well happen, his boyhood club is showing strong interest in him, apparently. I appreciate Marseille, this is what we're talking about, and I appreciate they're not a cash-rich club, but I believe they are in the Champions League this coming season. So if they were to put the pressure on and sort of say, we really want him to come, you used a fine example that I talked about in the last ramble, which is what if Billy was playing at, say, Crewe and he was 23 and he might be able to forego Man United and Liverpool for a couple of seasons, and sort of knowing that he'll get there eventually. But if Sheffield United come calling and we're in the Europa League, it may well not happen again. We want him now to join us on this journey. It's very difficult to say no to. They're not going to match our valuation, I'm sure, but how difficult could it be for us if they start turning the screw a little bit? Do we think he's definitely gone? I know you talked about we've offered him a new deal, and there may be things in that new deal that suit him, if you like a low release clause and things of that nature. Is there any chance he stays beyond this season?
To be absolutely clear, we desperately want Illy to stay. We're not looking to cash in on him. We're not looking to sign him to a new contract with a view to selling him for a lot of money. We want him to stay. Everybody wants him to stay.
Yeah,
we're offering,
you can build your team around him, can't you?
Exactly. We're offering him a contract that no other player's ever been offered at Sheffield United. We're offering him release clauses that protect him if we get relegated and things like that. We're even offering him clauses that do reflect the fact that he has a boyhood club that's there in the background. The problem with Illy is, and I think we're not alone in this. Sometimes if you're a club and you get someone who comes along who's effectively a generational talent, like you say, I've been watching football longer than you. I think he's the best player we've ever seen. So that's 50 years. I think unless you've got amazing hindsight and sign someone up at 17 or 18 for sort of a 10-year contract, this is not, we're not unique in this situation where someone like Sander doesn't necessarily get a massive club when he leaves and goes out of contract. He might get a nice payday. He might move to somewhere he wants to move to.
Yeah,
Illy goes to a massive club. He's just a talent that every club in England and probably France and everywhere would sign for the signing on fee that he would get in 12 months' time. And that's where he's at. That's his reputation within football. So I actually thought before the recent interest, I was pretty certain that even if we wanted to sell him, I thought he would do 12 months in the Premier League, leave his options open, and possibly leave at the end of the season. And that would probably depend on how well we did and things like that. And I think even if he wanted to go and play for his boyhood club, he could probably do that on a free transfer next year, and it would be an affordable package to Marseille. I think the only thing that's really come up that's sort of changed that a little bit is that Marseille have qualified for the Champions League, which they don't do every year, and obviously there's an attraction to going back to your own club and playing in the Champions League. But my gut feeling is I just don't think that club has enough money to tempt both Illy and us to actually take him away this summer. I think, I think if the club decided that they wanted to cash in on him, I don't think that Marseille is the club that they would be able to do that with. So I just don't see the numbers adding up. So if you want to see another year of Illy, I would suggest that that's what will happen. But it's a complication that we could all do without in the background there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's as we thought, isn't it, really? And it's a waiting game to see what happens. And as you say, Darren, there's a takeover on the horizon. So that's his reasoning for maybe pausing on negotiations with us as well and sort of seeing what else can be offered by the club. But I'm in agreement. I think he's an elite player with a ceiling that we haven't even seen at the Lane before. And why would he stay with us? And I'd love him to. We'd all love him to. But he doesn't owe us anything, and it can get bigger and better offers elsewhere. So let's just hope he's the man to keep us up this season, and then he can ride off into the sunset as an absolute Blades legend. So back to the questions then. Thank you for that, Darren. We've talked about Sander and Illy. So Dave Staniforth says, are the potential buyers for the club new candidates, and are they from Saudi Arabia? I think you've addressed this on Twitter, but for those that haven't heard.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have to be fairly careful around this subject.
Absolutely.
I spoke to the Prince earlier, this time last week, and he said that everything should be a bit more clearer in 5 to 6 weeks, which he wasn't saying the takeover would be completed in that time scale, but I think everyone would know where we're going by then. He did tell me that 5 to 6 weeks before that as well, though, having said that. So I have to caveat that, if I'm honest. I think where you're at with the takeover, if I'm absolutely honest, is that there are. I don't think I'm saying too much by saying that there's 3 parties that have done all the work on us, and we've done all the work on them. So and there are interested parties coming out of the woodwork all the time. There was one that even I know for a fact approached the club through me about 2 weeks ago. So there's all people there, but I think realistically, to the timescale we all want, we're probably at 3 parties. And then when people say, where are they from? I think the other thing I can say is that at the moment, it's not, and probably the reason why there's been the slight delay is because it's not one person coming who's a billionaire. They're consortiums. And what you've got to remember with consortiums, I use Leeds United as an example. Everyone says the 49ers have bought Leeds United. In reality, it's an investment group headed by the 49ers investment arm. And actually, a lot of the parties to that investment group are not actually the same people that have ended up buying it. So they invested in it when they were a minority shareholder. but one or two of them said, I don't want to complete the buyout. So they replaced them with other parties. And I think there's something 13 investors in this 49ers deal that were, and probably 4 or 5 of them weren't there before the actual buyout. And that's what you have with a consortium. So the gain you get from a consortium is you're not in a position where you're at the whim of one person or whether they want to keep backing the club. There's, in theory, an endless flow of money, because if someone doesn't want to continue with the project, they can find another funder, and they're not funding the whole thing themselves. But the downside is they're moving parts. So in the same way that they might agree a deal with us, they've then got to agree the deal between the consortium as to who's going to run the consortium and things like that. And again, you can see that with the offers that have been made to the Prince. There are certain ones that have still involve him to a certain degree. Some that he holds, he continues to hold a shareholding. Some there he loses his stake completely. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I know people are frustrated. But bear in mind, we weren't allowed to talk to anyone until the exclusivity with Dozi had finished, and we kept to that. So you were looking at sort of, we've not really been talking to people for longer than sort of 2 to 3 months. That's actually quite a short process for a multi-million-pound deal. So yeah, and so I will confirm that one of the consortium has a Middle East flavour, but it's not necessarily a Saudi flavour to it. But like I said, I think we'll all be a bit clearer about this in not too distant future. But unfortunately, I suppose the second question, I don't know if this was on your list, but it's not going to affect this window. I don't think anything will happen soon enough. I think the Prince was quite clear on that, and that unless somebody literally said, I want to influence this window, they'd sort of have to be a deal by the end of May and complete it by the 1st of August or something like that to then make an impact on this window. That time scale has passed, really.
Okay, thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't revisit a name that you mentioned there, Darren. As you're aware, I did have some contacts with Dozi myself at one stage. How far along from, because I've only heard the one side and I've obviously heard bits from the other side, but just as obviously someone as close to the Prince as yourself, how far did we get with Dozi?
Well, the one thing I do get a lot from fans, so I've sort of answered the question, but in reverse a little bit, is why? I mean, obviously, we had already got into a negotiation with the American chap that has ended up being in prison for wire fraud. And then there was obviously a lot of noise around Dozi. So there's a very valid question there, which is what the hell do we do when people approach us to buy the club? And unfortunately, football does tend to get its fair number of people that are maybe a bit left field that wouldn't go off and buy a food factory or something like that. So it's but again, taking it from where Sheffield United were, there was a deal on the table with a view to buying the club irrespective of whether it was promoted or not. And there was 2 different prices, one if we weren't and one if we were promoted. And the deal was meant to complete before we knew whether we would be promoted or not. You look at Dozi, and I know that there's a lot of noise around Dozi, and there still is now, but even today, I knew this question would come up, so I had a look this morning. His company that's floated on the NASDAQ is still, in theory, has got a market cap, so worth, let's call, of $200 million. So you think back to when United were approached, they've got a guy who's got a NASDAQ floated company. They've got a guy with a letter saying that he's got the money to complete this transaction. And the one thing that the Prince and I both just sort of shake our heads at is, why would someone pay you a deposit of £8 million and he disclosed that, so I don't think I'm giving too much away. Why someone disclose a deposit of £8 million and not have the wherewithal to complete the transaction? So it's easy to say in hindsight with all the stuff that arose, but you do a certain level of due diligence before the EFL get involved, and then obviously the EFL do their due diligence. So we were, from our point of view, that if Dozi had completed that deal and the EFL had given approval, then the deal was done. It wasn't even in our hands, and that actually was probably one of the reasons why it got very frustrating around the embargo and the funding of the club, because we were sort of in a no man's land during the exclusivity period where the Prince wasn't free to put in money because a deal had been agreed with a party that actually it was in his control rather than ours whether we completed. So yeah, as far as we were concerned, it was a genuine purchase. It seemed a fair price for a club in the Championship, and he just couldn't complete because of EFL approval, as far as we're aware. All this other stuff probably wasn't really that relevant to us.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just for clarity as well, I know there was talk around the time that it all fell through that he would now challenge to get his deposit back. Are we safe in the knowledge that the deposit was paid for the right of exclusivity and to enter that rather than, any sort of down payment on the club that he could potentially claim back legally?
I don't think legal cases are ever that black and white, to be honest with you. I mean, as far as we're concerned, he agreed to pay a deposit with a view to securing exclusivity to purchase the club at an agreed price. And actually, we knew this deal was probably going a little bit wrong because he actually was due to pay more of the deposit than he actually paid. It actually started, the final bits of the deposit didn't come through on time. So that did give us a few issues.
It's a red flag.
There were, and you can imagine, I think Dozi himself said the last payment he made was mid-January, so people can sort of think around what happened in mid-January that maybe got out in the news that probably affected us. So, but as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not there, so as far as I understand from the Prince, he's confident that we did nothing wrong in that. We didn't disclose anything untoward into the public realm. We kept the exclusivity. He put the money down with a view to completing on the transaction. There's always a chance that he might say we didn't act in good faith, or he found something in the books that he didn't like, or something like that. But I think we're confident. But just to be clear, it's not Sheffield United that would need to pay him back. It was a deal. It's a bit like if you put a deposit down on your house, the deposit would be paid to you as the owner of the house. It wouldn't be paid to, say, the tenant in the house or something like that. Right. And that situation, we ourselves wouldn't have to pay that money back.
Fantastic. Thank you. You've covered Robert Kerr's first question, which was about vetting potential owners that are coming in. But he's also touched on having borrowed heavily from the Macquarie Bank to finance our investments. Does our current level of debt preclude any further loans unless we have new ownership?
Football financing is a little bit complicated by the fact that the mainstream banks don't like football. The mainstream banks actually funded football until the 80s, early 90s. But the problem you have is if a football club defaults, they don't want to be seen as the bank that's in the community that shuts down a football club or shuts down a ground or something like that. So basically, the mainstream banks just aren't interested in football, even the biggest clubs. So this is why you hear the names of Macquarie Bank and people like that. And the way that they fund football clubs is probably not the standard way that you and I would fund a business acquisition. So we have a ground that's worth about £50 million. In the latest accounts that we just published, it's worth about £50 million. In theory, you could get a mortgage on that, 60, 70, 80% or something like that, up to £40 million. And that's probably the level of our borrowing, our financial debt. But you can't really foreclose on a football stadium. You're effectively foreclosing on a football club if you take away that football ground. So the way the Macquarie model is based around basically future transfer funds that you're actually going to get. So we sold Aaron Ramsdale for £24 million, but that was paid to us in 3 instalments of £8 million. If we wanted that £24 million up front, so we borrowed against the £24 million, but the second and third year payments are actually going to go to Macquarie rather than us. And that's how the funding goes. And that's how it works with the TV money. So, but what I would say is when we finished in the Championship, the most we could borrow in the Championship from Macquarie or anyone else was the last 8 million on Ramsdale and the last parachute payment, which was for a third season relegated team, would be about £15 million. So the most we could have borrowed from third parties would be about just over £20 million. And I think we did. I think it's safe to, we haven't seen those accounts, but it's probably safe to assume we did. You come into the Premier League and you can borrow against future guaranteed income. Now, our guaranteed income now is next season's Premier League money plus 2 years of parachute payment. So we're in a position where we could actually mortgage the future of the club if we chose to. We could actually borrow 170 million or thereabouts if we really wanted to. And we could actually probably satisfy what a lot of fans want to do and spend a lot of money in transfer fees in this window on the basis that you'll spend more in this window than any other. We've done that. I think we're a little bit once bitten, twice shy, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so we will. There was actually a lot of shake around with the loans. So basically what happened was we paid all the old loans back and now we've got a more of a new consolidated loan. It's almost like a big overdraft in a lot of ways. We could spend against future money, but we're not planning to spend against second and third year money. We're trying to be very careful this time.
Great. And I think that's the sensible option, Darren. Thank you for that. And I'm just conscious of your time, so I won't keep you much longer, but I have got a couple of bits to get into. Stuart Blade's asking, should we be getting excited about incomes? And I'll tag on to that. Is it more or less a formality now that Anis Slimani comes in and becomes our first summer signing?
Just on the first bit, yeah. I mean, putting aside signings, yeah, you should be dead excited. Like I say, I'm 50 years a fan of Sheffield United. I think I've had this will be my 8th season in the Premier League. I think I've probably watched the team more seasons in League One or Third Division as it was. So yeah. I think we fans should actually treat this as a bit of a golden era. I know with the paupers compared to Manchester Cities of this world, but the last time we were an established Premier League or top division club was in the 60s and 70s. So I think we should enjoy it. Yes, there will be incomings. The financial situation has been transformed by the promotion. So don't get worried about what happened before. It's all changed now. And in terms of Slimani, yeah, I think there's always the chance. I actually remember a long time before your time where we once signed a chap called Alan Whittle, and he was I really liked him as a player, and he failed the medical, and I was gutted. So I am always a little bit reticent, but I mean, he should, if he passes his medical, yeah, I think he'll be the first summer signing.
Smashing, thank you. That resonates with me quite well because I remember when Chris Wilder was in charge and we were 9th and pushing for Europe, he did sort of pull me and say, you know, Jimmy, this is as good as it gets. Don't let this run away with you that we're going to be another Champions League club in a few years. And he was right, as he usually is. So, yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to throw some names at you now, Darren, and you can either tell us whether it were never happening or yes, there was some interest or there is some interest or one that you may not be able to comment on. But there's 2 names at the moment that I will be shouted at if I don't put to you. The first one, Tommy Doyle. Are we going to get Tommy Doyle back at the Lane? Is it permanent? Seems to be out of our reach. A loan may be more likely, but it does appear as though this one might be slipping away a little bit. So are you able to give us an update on Tommy and where we are with him?
There's been a lot of talk of Tommy Doyle. What people need to remember is Tommy's been playing in the England under-21s championships. I doubt he's even sat down with his reps to decide what he wants to do next season. So our season finished 2 months ago. For Tommy Doyle, it finished this weekend, something like that. Yeah. So I think you do have to not get too carried away. What I would say about the domestic loans is the big problem we have with the loans is there's only 2 of them. So obviously, if we had 4 or 5 loans and there was no limit to the loans that we can get from one single club, I suspect Tommy would be signed and sealed and ready for next season. The problem we have now is we're diving in the overseas market. We don't know which positions we're actually going to fill. There's 1 or 2 players we like. We don't know if they're going to be made available by their clubs. A lot of these loan players, the Premier League clubs like to include them in their own close season so that they stay involved and so that their managers can see them before they make a decision. So I think there's probably 9 or 10 names in the mix for the 2 loan spots that we have, and Tom is obviously going to be in that mix. The problem we have with the perm is I don't like talking about individual players' salaries, but I think it's been openly said his salary is not within our wage scale. So maybe we could accommodate him within our wage scale as a Premier League player. But then it's the same argument that we started with, full way around. How do we accommodate him if he has to take a 40 or 50% pay cut? He doesn't have that risk while he's in contract with Manchester City.
Yeah.
So I think I know for a fact that the initial transfer fee isn't an issue to us at all. I think actually most fans will be surprised at how modest that fee is. But it comes back to how do you secure a Premier League player on Premier League money when you want to include a relegation clause. And I think the only route that you might get here would be a loan with an option to buy at the end. But the problem you have with that is Manchester City just don't do those deals. They like to sell players with a buyback option in their favour. And also it would be again using our two loans. And if you say we've got Slimani coming in who plays in that deep midfield role, we don't have a replacement for attacking midfielder like McAtee, or we might not have another striker or something like that. I think it all depends on whether Tommy's position is the one that we want to use one of the loan slots on.
I mean, the only one other sort of caveat we could consider would be to get him on a permanent and maybe bend the wage structure slightly and obviously commit more in the short term, but then include a relegation release clause, whether it be for the fee that we paid for him originally or so he can then leave if we do get relegated. But obviously it's for the powers that be to decide who and when and what sort of deals we put to them. Sorry.
Yeah, just on that one. I mean, the point you make about, well, we could just ignore the relegation clauses. We could actually just not put them in and just assume that if we get relegated, we would sell Tommy. But we thought that when we bought Sander Berger and Ryan Brewster. I mean, one of the big decisions we made, knowing that we were using future money, was that we assumed that we would be able to sell these players upon relegation. And like I say, I think once you saw how difficult that was, we were very loath to go down that route again.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to be including those wage reductions. I'm more thinking that he would have to back himself that he could get another Premier League move if we're to, but again, it's a risk for the player, isn't it? So yeah, there's loads of sort of options in the air with that one. So thank you. The other name that I think is on most fans' lips, because it's been reported by the Bladesman and a few others are circulating it now, that Benny Triori, the young striker who's more or less scoring a goal a game for FC Häcken in the Swedish league. Is he somebody of interest to United? Have we made a bid? Have we made contact? Or is it all just paper talk?
You've touched on the big problem with that deal at the moment. When a player, no matter what the standard of the league, is scoring a goal every game, then it's not going to be an easy deal to agree. There is an interest, and we have watched him, and we've watched him for quite a while, and actually we've watched him probably a bit longer than this run. And I think when Rangers put in a bid and it was rejected, I think for all the clubs involved at that stage, there was a figure in mind that people thought would secure his transfer. I think the owner of the club has said it would need to break their transfer record. With their transfer record's only £3.5 million. So I think there was a deal to be done for quite a few clubs. But we're in a situation here at the moment where there's lots of clubs watching him, and the club aren't really in a position where they need to move quickly. They're second in the league. Their season's still ongoing. They're in the Champions League this week. They are not really in a rush. At some point, Rangers, ourselves, whoever, are going to say, well, look, if you don't just sort of put your marker down and tell us how much you want for this player, we're going to move on. And that's the risk that his club take. I don't think there'll be any issues with the personal terms or this player coming to us. I think he'd love to play in the Premier League. It's just really we tying down his club to what fee they would accept. And I don't think that just applies to us. It applies to a few. And what will normally happen in this situation is someone will put the bid in, it will be accepted, and then everyone else knows their price and they can say, well, I'm interested and I'm interested, or I'm out, or something like that. And I think we're sort of at that sort of level with him at the moment.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Right, and as I said, now, Darren, I'm just going to throw some names at you and let me know the status or the situation. First one I'm going to go with is Connor Cody. Were we ever in for Connor Cody?
No. No, I mean, it just didn't make sense with our transfer policy. I think if John Egan was out for 9 months or he was about to be sold, Connor Cody would be someone that you'd be looking for as a like-for-like replacement. But there was no future resale in him. There was not an ongoing. He wasn't going to be the player to replace Egan if he goes out of contract. It just was never a goer. It wasn't a position. If he was left-footed, you could maybe see the argument, but it just wasn't a position that was priority for us.
No, I agree, and it was a surprise to see him linked. I think the low agreed fee between Everton and Wolves is what sort of sparked people's interest. But from what I understand, Everton paid a substantial loan fee to get him in the first place. And looking at him going to Leicester for 7.5, rising to 8.5, we would never have been in that race. And his wages are astronomical as well, as we're aware. So, yeah, we're a strange one to be linked with. But another one that's sort of a bit of a strange one to some, Mason Holgate. His key position is what, right centre half, right wing back. A lot would argue they're our strongest positions within the squad. I know some wouldn't like Basham playing instead of Anel, but do you waste, again, we've talked about precious loan spots. We couldn't afford his wages to get him on a permanent, I'm fairly sure. So where does Mason Holgate fit in, if at all it was a true rumour going around?
No, I think there is some validity to that rumour. I mean, basically, he's a player that's very well known to Hecky, and Hecky rates him, and I think Hecky thinks he could get better out of him than Everton have for the last 2 to 3 years. He's been on our radar since we were last in the Premier League. We made a concert.
Yeah, good player, really good player.
I do like him. Really done much since, to be honest.
No, he's had a poor couple of seasons.
Yeah. And I think it's back to what Hecky values. Obviously, he probably kept a few more players than some fans wanted him to, and I think he values where they fit into the team spirit and everything. So there's an interest, but I think again he's in that mix of, like you say, we'll in the end we've only got 2 loan spots. Will we use it on someone who can cover 2 positions that we're very strong in? I think that remains to be seen towards the end of the window.
Yeah. I mean, in a similar vein, Kyle Walker was linked with the Blades. Anything still lingering with that? It's gone very quiet from a Sheffield United perspective.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I had a photo from a Sheffield United fan in Las Vegas yesterday and he's in the same hotel with
wow.
Kyle.
Brilliant.
And no, I think we can safely assume that one's dead. I mean, it was sort of when you had a question earlier about our deals opportunistic. I mean, he wants to play for Sheffield United. It's only probably as a Premier League team that we could even get anywhere near him. He seemed to be getting pushed out of the door at Man City. So I think there were talks had. But I mean, I think he played. I know he didn't start in the Champions League final, but he seems to still have a future at Man City. He's got teams like Bayern Munich. He's got money from Saudi. I think he just comes when he's about 50 or something like that.
Yeah, agreed. No, that's great. James Trafford, the now much talked about keeper who's on the verge of going to Burnley. Were we ever in for James Trafford? Was he in discussions?
This goes back. We've actually got what is very good news here is we've got a really good relationship with Manchester City. We had a really long.
Not a bad thing at all to have that, is it? Not a bad thing.
The thing about it is we had a long chat with Chicky, who's the guy who knows everything there, and I think off the back of that, we were offered James Trafford as part of a general discussion as to this player might be available for loan, this might play for loan. Obviously, the Girona friendly came out of that because they're part of the City group.
Yeah.
And that's the other side of it, that we've talked to them about players within the City group, not just within Manchester City, that might be of interest because there's a lot more leeway with loans and the like in those clubs. I know why fans said we should sign him is because somebody reported in the press that he was available for £6 million. If he'd been really available for £6 million, I think he would now be signed by Sheffield United. It was just misreported. It was a conversation that we were never going to pay well, I think the deal is £14.5 million. We were never going to pay that for a goalkeeper in this particular window. So I don't even think we discussed it more than a minute, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's a great signing for Burnley. I think he'll go on to be a fantastic goalkeeper. He's already proving that straight away. But we're not in those conversations at the moment due to our financial situation. So, and it's the sensible way to proceed as a club, I think. Just on Man City, then, I think unfortunately we may be putting this one to bed. But James McAtee, no sign of him returning.
I don't. Again, I think it's one of these. There's no decision being made. I think what we have to be careful about. Man City placed him with us because they thought that we'd be in a similar situation to what Man City are in the Premier League, facing blanket defences, and he needs to make space for himself and play those little balls through and things like that. They saw it as good experience for him. They may not see the same value if we're a struggling Premier League side, but I wouldn't rule out McAtee coming back. I don't think that's a definite given. I think Pep wants to see him, but I think that applies to all these Premier League loans. I think he's one of these that we would hang on for to see if he was available or not.
Right, fantastic. Just a couple more three more I'm going to put to you, Darren. Lewis O'Brien. He's currently at DC United. Obviously didn't get in the Forest 25-man squad, which is absolutely ridiculous. It just shows how poorly planned their window was, that they're throwing so much money at a talented player and can't even get him in the team or in the squad. Loaned out to America because it was the only region that he could play in that was still going, and just an absolute shambles from Forest. From what I understand, that they won't really be keen to do a deal with us to sort of do us any favours. What's the situation on Lewis O'Brien? Are we in for him? Are we interested?
I think Lewis O'Brien's someone who's going to be always of interest to us. But he was someone that we were looking at if we'd have been promoted instead of Forest. And he was someone we were looking at in January if a deal was going to be done for Sander. But that at that time was going to be a loan to the end of the season. Right. And I think that's probably ended up the long-winded way of why he ended up in the States, because he just didn't get a deal done quick enough in January. I think ultimately with Blackburn. So he's always going to be there of interest. So I would not rule it out. But looking at the players I've seen, I don't see him in the list of 5 or 6 players that we're currently looking at. He might come into that mix of loan players, but I'm not sure there's much for Forest to gain from loaning as a player to a team that they're probably going to be there or thereabouts in the league table with.
In the mix with them, yeah, I agree. Now I can't say this player's name with any confidence, Darren, but it's Chukwuemeka at Chelsea, the ex-Villa youngster, that centre midfielder that was rumoured to be coming on loan to us. He may well be on our loan list. Is there any truth to that?
I feel like I'm a broken record here. I mean, there's a lot of loan players, and there's been a lot of going to this club. Are you going to let this out? The one that recently has been Diallo from Manchester United. They're all in the shake-up. We think there's 3 or 4 names that will come towards the end of the window that aren't necessarily available today. And again, like I said, we're hoping to fill certain positions, but with overseas players. But if we don't, we might need one position more than another. So yeah, he's definitely in the mix. We like him, but I think probably all the bottom half of the Premier League would like him as well.
Yeah, I think there's always this sort of panic and sort of why aren't we doing more and why aren't, but if you look at our record in the transfer market, certainly under Hecky, it's a really strong one. You know, Anel being the main permanent signing, but not many. Obviously, Tommy Doyle had time at Cardiff and abroad just before that, but Tommy Doyle really made an impact coming in. I think McAtee was a real obvious turnaround from a boy to a man in his loan period. I think we've done really well in recent times in the transfer market. So I'm quietly confident that we'll get things right. And the last name that I'm going to put to you, Darren, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this man because I talk about him all the time on the channel, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I've not heard any rumours about him, but I'm trying to force rumours about him. Cameron Archer at Aston Villa. Can we get anywhere close to him? Has he been in any conversations? Can you mention him to the Prince? Can you do anything to get him? This kid is going to be a superstar, and if Villa don't recognise that, then let's take full advantage and use one of our loan slots on getting Cameron Archer in.
Yeah, I mean, Cameron Archer, I mean, it's no secret, is it? I mean, it's
not anymore.
Not like you're shouting under the radar there, Jimmy, to be fair. I think with Cameron Archer, my understanding, and I think every club's asked about Cameron Archer, and probably the whole top of the half of the Championship and the whole bottom half of the Premier League have asked about Cameron Archer, and they're probably saying, well, Villa, why are you not picking him? Villa have got a problem at the moment. I think both actually in the Premier League and in Europe, you have to have a lot of English homegrown players. I can't remember off the top of my head what the qualifications are, but for the Europe players, it's something like 6 or 7, to be honest. And I don't think Villa's got any English-born players. I don't think they've got any English-developed players. So my understanding at the moment is that Villa, an ideal scenario, would keep him within their squad as an English-qualified player. Right. But obviously, if he isn't going to be anywhere near the first team, it's a waste of him and a waste for Villa. His market value will dwindle if he just sits out. So it'll be one of these. He's been playing in the under-21s. He'll come back to the pre-season late. His new head coach has probably never seen him. He'll probably work with him, and he's one of these that you hope might come available right at the death. And they're the sort of players you want to hold out for and not use your 2 slots for. So I mean, don't worry. We're fully aware of his ability and what he would do for the team, but I don't know whether he's available at the moment. I think that's the answer to it, to be truthful.
No, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, you can see how I've got a scouting background, finding all these hidden gems like Cameron Archer, can't you, Darren? Thank you so much for your time today. I didn't want to keep you so long, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that a lot of the subscribers and general fans of the club will be really appreciative of the updates. It certainly gives me a lot of peace of mind knowing that things are we know things are always happening behind the scenes, but it's good to have clarity on who and why and things of that nature. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be able to get you back on the channel again at some point.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And good luck with the channel.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Darren. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.
How about that then? We got him on, the main man, Darren Smith. Thank you for his time. If any of you got any comments that you'd like to make in relation to Darren's appearance or anything of that nature, please drop them below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. But I've kept you long enough now, so come on, you red and white wizards. Up the blade.